stay.
So, thank you very much. I have to say I was elected to the Assembly in 2012, so I haven't been here in this position all that long. I represent the town of Colony, which is in Albany County, the town of Niskayuna, which is in Schenectady County. It's the headquarters of General Electric Global Research, and the city of Schenectady, for a total of 130,000 people in the New York State Assembly. Now, in my assembly district in the Democratic primary for president was pretty much split evenly between Clinton supporters and Bernie Sanders supporters. But just by way of background, and not to offend anybody, I was the only state legislator in all of New York State, outside of New York City, to endorse Bernie Sanders for president. And I was a Bernie delegate to the Democratic National Convention. So following up on that, an organization was formed called the New York Progressive Action Network. And I am involved in that as well. It's an organization that was formed by the people who were Bernie Sanders delegates to the convention. It's not meant to be a Bernie organization. That's why it's named that. It's a progressive organization. I did want to mention that we've been having an argument in NIPAN about the Constitutional Convention, and I have taken the position, not as well researched, of course, as Michael, but who I've met several times previously. But I came to the conclusion, once I found out how the Constitutional Convention would be put together, that would be essentially a playground for the wealthy. So I've opposed it, and I've been trying to persuade my colleagues in NIPAN not to go in that direction. I think one of the difficulties in Democratic politics in the state of New York is there's a lot of money in New York City. There's left-wing money in New York City, but on the whole, left-wing money in New York City is not going to control the Constitutional Convention, so I think that's a mistake. But anyway, I'm here to talk about budget matters, and I think people get scared of budget. There's numbers involved. It's, difficult. I don't think so. I think that it's very simple and easy to understand, and so we're going to go through about 7 fundamental principles of budgeting and the relationship between the federal budget and the state budget. So the first fundamental principle is that the defense budget, the federal defense budget, is not only about killing people overseas. It is killing our country economically. 57% of federal discretionary spending dollars are spent on defense, or offense, as the case may be. We already spend, as many of you know, as much money on defense as the rest of the entire world combined. Now, Social Security and Medicare are not discretionary spending from general revenues. There is no dedicated revenue stream for defense. All funding comes from general revenue, like income tax. The same is true of Medicaid, by the way. It is part of discretionary federal spending. In contrast, Social Security and Medicare have dedicated revenue streams through a payroll tax, which we're all familiar with. Incidentally, Social Security tax is assessed only up to $127,200 in income. That's right. If you earn $5 million per year, you pay the same Social Security tax as a person who earns $127,200, without going into at the time, justifiable history as to why that occurred. I mean, in sum and substance, when Roosevelt designed Social Security, it was designed not to be a pension system. It was designed to be a floor upon which a pension system would be built. So the feeling was at the time that the wealthy had their own pensions, and therefore they would not need to be taxed beyond that figure. A lot has changed, obviously, with respect to pensions. Also, Social Security tax is not assessed on capital gains. So if you make your money trading stock, as in a hedge fund, you pay no Social Security tax. If all income and capital gains were subject to Social Security tax, no one could possibly advance the false argument that Social Security is broke. It's not broke anyway, but no one could possibly be advancing that argument. There'd be so much money in the system, the payroll tax could probably be lowered. So the third point I want to make is that state and federal spending are intertwined. And that's why cutting federal taxes is an illusion. Most of our major highways and sewer and water infrastructure were built in significant part with federal dollars. When federal taxes go down, but military spending increases, states have to fund the infrastructure themselves. The states don't have the money. This year, Governor Cuomo enacted $2.5 billion in additional funding for infrastructure. To begin with, he would not have done it but for the Hoosick Falls fiasco, which made it a major media issue. Furthermore, it is a drop in the bucket since we are so far behind. If you look at our train system, for example, compared to Europe, it's fairly obvious. And infrastructure is critical to economic development. Business wants quality infrastructure, and to the extent you don't have it, you're not going to attract any business. So it's no wonder that our state is lagging behind where we should be from an economic development perspective. Fourth principle is that there's no shortage of revenue available. We can stop companies from offshoring income to evade taxes. We can enact or reenact the stock transfer tax. From 1915 to 1979, New York had a small, very small sales tax on the sale of stocks and bonds. It's a smaller sales tax than what you pay when you go to the store. Presently, the entire tax is rebated back to Wall Street. That is $16 billion in lost revenue. Having that revenue would end the state's infrastructure problem. There's some weird guy, by the way, named Speck, who has proposed actually collecting the tax. The establishment Democrats will not do it. The argument is, they'll move, says Cuomo II. Well, they won't, because New York City, not Topeka, Kansas, is the financial capital of the world. Second, the tax is so small, as I mentioned, that it's like a flea on the back of an elephant. And if the tax were a joint federal-state effort, they couldn't escape it anyway. Other major exchanges in the world already have the tax. Moreover, many prominent economists, such as Joseph Stiglitz, former chief economist of the World Bank, and Jeffrey Sachs, support the tax because it discourages day trading in favor of long-term investment. Next, I want to address the infamous health care amendment proposed by your very own John Faso. Now, this is an issue that really needs a little bit of depth of discussion. Obviously I'm a single payer supporter. I don't support anything about this Republican proposal. But we really have to understand what's going on with this Faso-Collins amendment, so-called. Medicaid is a joint federal-state program. 50% is paid for by the federal government and 50% paid for by the state. New York State is the only state in the entire nation that passes on 50% of the state's cost down to the counties. So a quarter of Medicaid spending in New York State is being paid for by the county governments. The 50% is federal. Of the 50% state share, your local county governments are paying half of that. And the way the local county governments do that is through a property tax. which we pay. We have different components of our property tax. There's a town or city tax depending on where you live. There's the county tax, and of course the school tax. I learned about this when I was an Albany County legislator, which I served in that position for 12 years. 95% of the county share of the property tax goes to pay Medicaid. That's the county tax again, not the city or the school, which are separate. Contrary to what Governor Cuomo tells us, this is the main reason why New York State property taxes are so high, not local government spending. Most local governments are having a very difficult time making ends meet. Now, FASO's amendment would prohibit the state from passing on the cost to the counties. Again, I'm not saying I favor this, but we need to understand what it would do. The state would then have to come up with $10 billion, which is essentially what the counties pay towards Medicaid. The situation, however, would not be as dire as the government claims. We could switch to a single-payer health insurance system, which is not property or income tax funded at all, but is funded by a graduated payroll tax paid 80% by the employer and 20% by the employee. This is an issue that I'm extremely familiar with. We had a wonderful panel discussion on it in my town. We had at the Colony Town Library, and that's a big town, 83,000 people. So much interest, we had to turn people away. It was standing room only, and it was just a terrific meeting. So I can talk a lot about the economics of single payer. There's a great article by some UMass professors called An Economic Analysis of the New York Health Act, which I would urge people to take a look at. It's not complex. So anyway, the point being that if we went in the single payer direction, there wouldn't be any need for this additional county property tax to fund Medicaid. Medicaid would be subsumed within the single payer program, and this whole issue that the governor lives in fear of would be eliminated. Another thing the governor could do would be to reinstate the stock transfer tax. Now, why doesn't the governor want to do that? Obviously. It's the source of his campaign contributions. So he doesn't want to have those people taxed, no matter how little it might be. So again, these are alternatives to using the property tax to fund Medicaid. The governor doesn't want to do it because we need to face the facts that this governor is just not very progressive. What he does is on social issues, he may be progressive, but not on any other issues. We're going to get to the free college in a minute, and you'll see why he's even less progressive than you might think. So that brings us to the state budget. As you can see, federal budgets affect the state budget. Ladies and gentlemen, our state budget is just a giant shell game. What I mean by that is that the governor announces new programs to great fanfare in the press. But there is no new revenue. So he's just taking money from other programs to support the flavor of the month. Let's take free tuition, for example. To begin with, it is a limited program. This is not like social democratic Europe, where tuition is universally low across the board. Now that's what Bernie Sanders was trying to do, and to be honest with you, I was a Bernie supporter, but I wrote a 2-page letter to Bernie telling him he made a mistake standing with our governor on this issue. So this program is a means-tested program. It's only available to those with joint incomes less than $120,000. There is also a total spending cap. In other words, it's first come, first serve, and then the money runs out. The worst thing is the governor took money from many other already underfunded programs to pay for it. He took $7 million from childcare, which is at historically low funding levels. So this is the giant shell game. One of the problems with means-tested programs, and as progressives, we defend them, but well, you know what, I can illustrate this a little better towards the end of my remarks. I'll get back to that. But means-tested programs have a very negative political impact. They're actually a cause of a lot of right-wing politics in America. So there are people who are struggling. Let's say they're making $130,000 a year, joint income. There's a lot of expenses. They may have a much more difficult financial position than someone making $120,000, because maybe the person making $120,000 inherited a house, which the other people with the higher income have to buy. So what happens is you get resentment because people don't benefit from the programs that they're paying for. And that's a big cause of the rise of right-wing politics in the United States. Anyway, so when government becomes a series of partially funded programs far short of need, how do you solve that problem? You're sitting there, you're the governor, you want to say, we're doing this in New York, we're doing that in New York, I'm on TV, I'm the greatest. So what you do is you have what's called grant-based funding. And only those who can afford to hire the best grant writer get funding. The state wastes resources, taking employees away from, say, environmental protection to sit around evaluating grant applications. Sometimes even our own public interest organizations like grant-based programs because they believe they can exert influence on who gets the funding. However, grant-based programs are not inevitable. They are not the only way to do business. Many programs are formula-based, like basic highway aid to municipalities in New York. There's a formula, how much highway do you have to deal with, there's a pot of money, and it gets distributed automatically. And by the way, when you use a grant-based program, that's why a lot of the funding that maybe we secure for things from the New York State Assembly takes years before it can get out there, because meanwhile the grant process is going through all these evaluations and so forth. With formula-based programs, the money just goes where it needs to go instantly. So let's talk about a program that we're all familiar with as an example, which is Social Security, the most beloved program, government program in the history of the United States. Social Security is formula-based. Imagine if funding were more limited and we all had to apply for benefits and our applications had to be evaluated by thousands of government employees. Not very efficient. And it would be very divisive, which is the point I was making earlier, since those who pay the tax but did not get benefits would resent those who get the benefits, which is a problem with means-tested programs such as Medicaid. Social Security and single-payer health insurance eliminate this divisiveness. Yes, you pay taxes, and you may pay a little bit more to support poorer people who need health insurance, but you also get the benefit. So I take my inspiration from the fact that I'm a big optimist. So I take my inspiration from the fact that we once had a progressive president in the United States of America. His name was Franklin Roosevelt. He lived a short distance from here in Congressional District 19. He once said, "We now know that government by organized money is just as dangerous as government by organized mob. Never before in all our history have these forces been so united against one candidate as they stand united today. They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred." Bernie Sanders did not say that. Franklin Delano Roosevelt said that. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a practical politician, but he fought for his principles. Getting Social Security passed was no easy task. The same Wall Streeters who oppose economic reform now opposed it then. Social Security failed the first time it was proposed. Roosevelt responded by campaigning for progressive New Deal Democrats against conservative Democrats in primaries. When his candidate, Claude Pepper, won a Senate seat in Florida, the conservative Democrats, and one of them was actually in New York State, got scared and they passed Social Security. That's leadership. Under Trump, in contrast to FDR, we now have government by organized money. We need to end it. We need government of the people, by the people, and most importantly, for the people. I congratulate you on fighting for this great cause. All we have to fear is fear itself. Thank you.